So, on Friday we got the unveiling of FF14's new 8.0 expansion, Evercold, and it was immediately apparent that practically everything will be changing. They announced a slew of absolutely insane features: region matching, reworked gearing systems, and the removal of tomestones in favour of a new progression system, and most importantly of all, at least potentially, the splitting of every job in the game into two different modes of gameplay: Reborn mode and Evolved mode. They even showed us some in-development gameplay of 4 different jobs and broke down their ideology behind this massive design shift. Now that I've had a bit of time to look in depth at everything we got to see and digest it, I want to talk about it. I have a lot of excitement about this new status quo, but also both questions and a little bit of trepidation. This could be really great if they pull it off, but I'd love to see more jobs to truly get an overall picture. Today, we'll cover each of the 4 jobs and how I feel about what we saw, as well as the overall direction FF14's combat will be taking. If you want to support discussions and deep dives into FF14, please do consider subscribing because it actually does support me a lot. Now, first of all, to recap, Reborn mode is how things are right now. No changes. Evolved mode is new. Every job has access to it and will massively consolidate the number of actions on your hotbar. It will also add situational action changes that will have buttons change based on who you target with them or how you specifically use them, and to free up rotation space for more choice-driven gameplay instead of purely rotation memorization. At least that's what I've taken from it. What they said about it specifically was this: the 3 main features of Evolved mode are to better highlight the characteristics of each individual job, to provide completely different rotations to those that exist in Reborn mode, and to reduce hotbar bloat by having fewer unique inputs, making it less confusing for new players than it was before. They also mentioned that overall, Evolved mode is expected to be stronger than Reborn mode by design, and that's just how it is. Now, to make it clear, I welcome a change, and I welcome the new addition, but I'm actually very much not a fan of them having 2 modes. It claims choice, but I don't see that in reality. The execution is different. What this instead comes across as is a transitional stage to removing Reborn rotations entirely. We are moving towards Evolved mode. New jobs will only support it, they are stronger than Reborn, and clearly the majority of the job design creative budget has gone into them. They are the intended way to play the game going forward, and by the sounds of it, they will be optimal as well. Reborn will eventually become a defunct side rotation or removed entirely. I worry that Square Enix left both in because they aren't fully confident in Evolved mode yet and want to have an out in case it's poorly received. Me personally, I would have preferred to see them fully commit and just tell us, we are reworking every job, here are how they work. With that said, I have a weird feeling there's a chance the community is going to start locking out Reborn players from high-end content if the difference between them in performance is anything more than marginal. I suppose we'll have to see what happens in that regard. With that said, I am very excited at the concept of evolved jobs. Secondly, raid buffs are being removed from the game for both versions of jobs. You could argue for this being both good and bad. It wasn't particularly interesting for the average player, and the consolidation of raid buffs into a singular 2-minute damage profile actively harmed how interesting they could be outside of those bursts, as well as how unique they were. They created a ceiling for their own creativity. With that said, there was a lot of micro-optimization within those windows which helped to raise the skill ceiling for those that wanted to push every individual potency from the game. Personally, I'm happy they're gone purely because we had the old system for so long with no real change that I'm just bored of it. My suspicion is they have shunted the mental burden of aligning raid buffs in a different direction entirely. One they've had before, actually, back in Stormblood. The burden of properly applying your unique personal mitigation to the party smartly, because both DPS that they showed have access to at least one. Combos have been consolidated into a single button, so to 123 now, you press 111. I'm a little mixed about this. A lot of people like to say, oh, you never messed up your combo anyway, so who cares? But that isn't really true, especially in either progression or stressful situations, the places where your rotation actually matters. Anybody who claims otherwise either doesn't do progression or is just lying. With that said, if consolidating combos makes way for more choice in our rotation, I'm all for it. As an offshoot of this, the second act of button consolidation Square Enix did was make certain actions change situationally. For example, Holy Spirit becomes Clemency when targeting an ally, Provoke becomes Shirk when targeting a party member, Gap Close becomes Cover when using it on a friend. Stuff like that I actually love. In my opinion, this might just be the perfect way to cut down on inputs without losing any of the options or depth you had previously. The only change I'd like to see are action buttons dynamically updating as you target in the moment, rather than you just needing to know what each one does in every situation. It will make it way easier for beginners as well. Auto attacks were also not present in the developer build, though the developers didn't mention whether this was an intentional choice or not. The interesting thing about this is that if they are removed intentionally, it actually raises the skill floor of jobs just a little bit. A change I was not expecting to be made by any means. In current FF14, if for example your Dragoon is literally not pressing their buttons at all, which does happen, they are still doing some damage by means of auto attacks. Now, your damage is completely in your own hands. Your agency dictates 100% of your output, and you will not be getting any freebies. Now, let's look at the 4 jobs they showcased because there is a lot to discuss about them. Firstly is Paladin. If you want a full breakdown of the changes specifically, I made a video on it that's linked in the description, so I'll be skipping over those minor details in this video today to instead talk about my thoughts. Firstly, tanks are going to be split into main and off tank. From 8.0 onwards, Paladin and the new tank will be defined as main tanks. They are skilled at directly taking damage and will be provided the ability to counter enemy attacks. We saw an example of that with the Paladin showcase. Warrior, Dark Knight, and Gunbreaker will be off tanks. These have the ability to use actions that lower enemy damage and are skilled at reducing the damage that allies take. In theory, I can get behind this, though I'd really like to see what this actually ends up amounting to in reality. It could be really cool, especially if this ally mitigation trait that off-tanks have actually ends up being a real active component in its use. An important distinction to make here is that just because tanks are defined as main and off-tank in the game does not mean they necessarily need to be used in that manner. I think of it as the pure and barrier healer split, with the exact same upsides and downsides. A barrier healer can provide regens as well as high throughput, it just has to work a bit harder to do so, and is occasionally limited by cooldowns. You can clear with double barrier or double regen, you just need more coordination and care. It's almost certainly going to be just like that. My current theory is that off-tanks don't get access to the short cooldown, but main tanks do, like Holy Sheltron on Paladin, so that would mean, for example, Warrior would lose Bloodletting. These short cooldowns are insanely powerful for both mitigation and sustain, and that alone could be a difference maker between their categorization. They still need to be able to take damage and busters, because 2-target fights, swap and share busters, as well as recovery situations exist, and of course 4-man content. They are still required to be an acceptable tank, so I think that fears may be slightly over-exaggerated in this regard. I really like the timed block and counter-strike system. When you time a block with Holy Sheltron well, you get a GCD counter-strike to use, with the potency being increased based on whether you blocked it within 4 seconds of pressing the cooldown, or 8 seconds. I love that there seems to be an overall emphasis from these job changes on you timing your actions correctly to get the desired effect. Considering in Dawntrail the speed and tempo of fights went up, having the speed and tempo of active decision making in rotations do the same helps to match that pace well. I also wonder if there's a cool little piece of optimization you can do here. Let's say you block a hit within the first 4 seconds, use that counter strike immediately, then take a second hit and block it within the 8-second window. Do you get a second counter strike from that same cooldown? Because if you do, that would be really interesting and cool. It's also confirmed from the footage that you can cover another player who is about to take damage, use Holy Sheltron, and then use that to generate a counter strike as well. I can see the system actually being really intuitive and interesting to engage with, and I'm pretty excited to try it out in real fights, basically. There's also a lot more freedom in how Paladin uses their ranged attacks now, seeing as Confitia combo is for all intents and purposes a 40-second cooldown with 2 charges thanks to its gauge. This lets you situationally slot it into your rotation based on how it lines up with the fight, which I'm a fan of, if I'm going to be honest. It's interesting that for Paladin, they have 2 gauges now, and both of them are accrued passively. In fact, all of the jobs that they showcased have at least 1 gauge that just goes up passively in combat and can be spent on something, to the point that I'm really wondering if this is going to be standardized across the board on all jobs. I do have one question about Paladin actually, and many jobs if we expect the trend to continue. How does basic AoE work? Is it also a situational button? Will your basic 1-2-3 single target combo change into AoE when you're close to multiple targets? Is there instead an action we haven't seen yet that wasn't on the hotbars? How does that work? I'm expecting that the former is more likely, but how exactly does that work in situations where AoE wouldn't be a gain but there are still multiple targets? What's the nuance there? Basically, I have questions, and I'm really curious to see what the devs ended up doing in that regard. I suppose that in itself is exciting, right? Questions. Jobs have been a solved game for so long that I'm surprised to have unknowns. White Mage was the healer shown, and as a healer main, I was of course very excited to see it. Unfortunately, I'm not as positive about it as I had initially hoped I would be. Don't get me wrong, there are some changes I really actually adore, but parts of the kit have been gutted in such a way that I expect the moment-to-moment gameplay to get significantly worse unless fight design changes a lot, which isn't expected, and in turn isn't ideal for the enjoyment of older encounters. So first, the good. Regens are limited behind the Lily gauge that enables afflatus actions now. This is good, because now you have to make a choice and commit a resource to access the core of what makes White Mage as a regen healer strong. You can't spam Medica 3 or keep full regen uptime, you instead need to make a decision and pick your moments carefully. Limitation is the crucible that allows you to take a risk, and taking risks are what allow you to feel good for executing well. There's also a significant peeling back on the sheer quantity of healing OGCDs the job has access to. This seems to be an intentional design decision and an effort to somewhat fight back the tide of the blatant power creep in healer job kits that have over time eroded their necessity to actually think about healing a lot of the time. When you have less tools, you need to use them wisely or commit GCDs to the problem. This is a good thing. One thing I find very strange though is that Square Enix said they are making it so that White Mage can commit healing GCDs without a damage penalty, because they wanted that to be its identity. But that's its identity right now. It sounded like they are changing it in an attempt to make it something that it already is in the current state of the game. White Mage is quite literally the healer that uses afflatus actions to nullify the damage loss of healing GCDs. So in that case, what are you changing? Misery is gone, and in its place is the Sanctity system. You use a healing GCD, you get a stack, then you can use a Glare 4, which has a cooldown, and that will spend your Sanctity with scaling potency based on the stacks you have. It's Misery Light, for all intents and purposes. Same thought process, but you can use it incrementally instead of needing to use it all at once at the end now. I do think this is fine in theory. In fact, honestly, I kind of expected White Mage to get access to incremental misery in 8.0 to make it a bit more new player friendly, but it's the other facets of White Mage's damaging kit that worries me. That's because it basically doesn't have one. White Mage has this sanctity system and glare. That's it. Every second glare, it reskins itself for a second action that seemingly has identical potency, identical effect, and is just a separate animation. You don't even have a dot anymore. So now, White Mage is even more spamming of one button than it was before, somehow in the shock of the century, except this time, there are cast bars removed so you don't even have to think about it while you do it. To me, this didn't convey any kind of quote-unquote removing buttons but adding choice-driven rotations. There is less choice than before when it comes to damage specifically. It really feels like White Mage is missing an entire job mechanic and one additional button when it comes to damage that could fix everything. What about a skill that modifies based on the last heal you used? So, you use a cure and then that button and it becomes a ground AoE. You use a Medica and then it becomes a dot, so on and so forth. Something like that would be cool, I don't know. I thought about it for 20 seconds. I do really like that a lot of AoE mitigations have lost duration. Temperance is 10 seconds now, Plenary is 6. Once again, timing has become a key factor in how you use your protective abilities, more so than ever before. Lastly, White Mage has Holy as a separate skill. This kind of flies in the face of what we see from the other 3 jobs in this development panel, where I had immediately assumed that AoE versus single target was a situational sensitive shift of the same action. It appears here that they are an entirely different button. I wonder if somehow that could end up making way for a shift in the rotation that in my eyes might possibly fix the gaping hole 8.0 White Mage has. Dragoon looks cool as heck, honestly. It has a split between left and right positionals now, meaning that the job has left, right, and rear as the 3 positionals that you'll be alternating between. Sinister, Dexter, and Heavensward, each providing you access to either an OGCD action afterwards, or a ranged GCD attack that you can stockpile for a moment of need. Jumps, allowing you to break those rules of engagement, are a nice little addition to the system as well, and far more intuitively fit into the rotation in a satisfying manner than something like True North ever could. Now, you're constantly actively making a decision on which positionals to ignore on a singular moment-by-moment basis, and taking a split-second cost to your movement to enable those positional free attacks. It feels like it has what could be both a simple and engaging core gameplay loop with those 2 as the main tenets. As a payoff for the build-up, you get access to Life of the Dragon, which is a speedy GCD combo finisher akin to Inner Release, but fast. In theory, I don't hate this, but I do have to express minor concerns that both DPS shown, Bard and Dragoon, both use this exact same archetype as one of their main damage payoffs. Press same GCD repeatedly, but quick, isn't bad per se in and of itself, but only if it isn't just universally utilized across the board. As long as it's used sparingly and we just so happened to see most of the jobs using it, I think it's fine. If every job does it though, I would instead argue that it would be an unfortunate example of bad homogenization. With that said, I also love Sky High. Not only is it a unique heavy-hitting attack that plays into Dragoon's job fantasy perfectly, but it also offers a completely unique raid utility that I both expect and hope isn't replicated anywhere else. It gets a 90% damage reduction. This lets it soak types of damage that you usually wouldn't be able to, soloing party stacks or even joining tank busters, and contributing to the team in new ways that DPS usually aren't able to. I actually think this is a genuinely interesting and deep addition that doesn't provide damage optimization, but instead opens new avenues to smartly optimize your defensives together. Overall, I actually think Dragoon's pretty solid. Of course, it's lost a lot of what makes it Dragoon right now, but if their goal was to appeal to job fantasy whilst making something unique, I certainly feel they've accomplished it here. This is assuming that the left-right positional split is unique to Dragoon, of course. If every melee is using it, it immediately goes from cool to kinda lame. Bard was the fourth job they showcased. This job has delved even further into acting as a support DPS, providing powerful raid utility through regens, shields, and movement speed buffs based on which song is active at the time, cycling through them one after another in an order of your choice to execute different DPS rotations. I like this, and I firmly believe that they'll lean into this further with a bunch of different DPS jobs, and that it's a good idea to do so. If every job has something unique they offer to the party that makes them and them alone feel important, it's really cool to work around and pick and choose and see what special things only your composition are able to achieve, especially if all of the options are useful, so there's never any job being specifically locked out. This, combined with different rotational styles, results in me, kinda seeing the vision that they're aiming for. I just desperately need to see more jobs to see if that's how it actually is in practice. I love that Bard got a cast bar back as well. You don't use it often. Right now it's literally only once per minute, but having it and deciding when to use it adds another decision in a fun little way. One running theme for many jobs this time around is an overarching 60-second rotational loop, with some leeway in that cycle somewhere, 5, 10, 15 seconds, so that they can easily shift things around. This is true for both Bard and Dragoon, and I anticipate more DPS jobs will be the same. I think it's very important to note that the evolved job system could work really well, but whether it will work or not hinges almost entirely on every job feeling and playing differently from one another. They cannot be like they are in Dawntrail, where some jobs can feel like they're legally distinct reskins from one another. I'm happy to sacrifice what we currently have for more flavour, as long as that flavour does indeed exist. I really wish we got to see multiple jobs within a single role at the development panel for that very reason. It'd be nice to alleviate those worries, to know for sure how the lay of the land is within a role in 8.0, though I suppose we likely won't get that information until far later. Maybe even the media tour that I would expect would happen somewhere towards the end of the year. Then, I suppose, all questions will be answered. With all of that said, even if the changes don't end up being a net positive for every job, I do firmly believe that based on what we've seen, they will be a net positive for at least some jobs. I'm happy there's change, even if the future is uncertain. I'm happy with a shake-up, even if everything isn't perfect. I want to see where they go with this and how FF14's Evercold expansion is changed as a result of those new jobs. There's going to be so much to learn and understand and experience that was just kind of missing from the last few expansions simply due to there being more change. Square Enix clearly know that decision making and risk reward are important in jobs, and we can see flashes of that ideology all throughout facets of these 4 evolved jobs. I just hope every job shares those same flashes, and that in some situations, like in the case of White Mage, they can expand and enhance the lacking components before release to land somewhere that looks like a really interesting Brave New World.